The Amtrak train glides through the landscape with a mechanical grace, its presence a quiet blend of utility and understated elegance. Inside, the carriage hums with the steady rhythm of steel wheels meeting rails, a soothing cadence that mirrors the pulse of the passengers within. Sunlight, tinged with the warm glow of late afternoon, filters through expansive arched windows, transforming the passing world into fleeting tableau of frost-touched trees and amber-hued fields. The deep navy seats, worn smooth by countless journeys, offer a mix of comfort and endurance. Adjustable headrests and softly creaking armrests invite passengers to settle in, while beneath the seats, luggage and personal bags remain neatly stowed. The aisle, scuffed by the passage of time and the relentless tread of shoes, tells the story of travelers, some weary, some eager, moving toward destinations that await beyond the horizon. A faint scent lingers in the air, a mix of aged fabric, brewed coffee, and the sterile tang of cleaning products. It mingles with subtle hints of cologne and perfume as passengers shift in their seats or navigate the narrow aisle. Overhead compartments, their frosted plastic doors clicking faintly with the train's gentle sway, hold larger bags, their presence felt in the quiet rocking above. Recessed fluorescent lights cast a neutral glow over the carriage, a timeless ambiance that blurs the boundaries of day and night. Security cameras perch unobtrusively in the corners, their unblinking gaze sweeping the scene with a silent vigilance. Within this moving capsule, sounds amplify, pages turning, a spoon clinking against a ceramic mug, the low hum of music escaping from a teenager's headphones. The tall, panoramic windows reflect ghostly silhouettes of the passengers, overlaid against the sun-drenched countryside. At the rear, a couple sits close, wrapped in a shared blanket, their murmured conversation blending into the background. Nearby, a businessman scrolls through his tablet, his concentration unbroken, while a child presses small hands to the cold glass, enthralled by the scenery blurring past in streaks of color and light. In the cafe car, passengers line up, their eyes on the illuminated menu listing coffee, sandwiches, and snacks packaged with cheerful designs. The attendant, a picture of practiced efficiency, smiles warmly as they tap at the register. Simple exchanges of small talk accompany the muted bustle, creating a sense of transient community. The train itself bears the marks of its history. A scratch on a window frame, a mismatched patch in the upholstery, a brass plaque reading Amtrak, Service and Safety First. These are the quiet witnesses to the millions of miles traveled and the countless lives intersecting briefly within its walls. As twilight falls, the train becomes a sanctuary of motion, its rolling symphony of wheels and whistles harmonizing with the soft murmur of human activity. The Amtrak Crescent Line, stretching from the vibrant streets of New Orleans to the bustling heart of New York City, unfolds like a silver thread through the fabric of the American South. The Crescent Line embodies transition, landscapes shifting from bayous draped in moss to the foothills of the Appalachians. It passes through history-laden towns, bustling cities, and quiet rural expanses, each stop a chapter in a story etched across states steeped in heritage and change. Through its journey, the train connects the lush, complex spirit of the South with the industrious rhythm of the North, offering passengers a fleeting glimpse into the heart of the eastern United States. As the train presses on, it carries more than passengers. It holds stories, whispers of history, and the transient beauty of fleeting connections. Each jolt of its wheels, each reflection in its windows, and every muted voice within its carriages weave a narrative that moves with it, endlessly forward, endlessly entwined with the landscape it traverses. As the train nears the South Carolina border, the landscape flattens into rolling plains interrupted by rocky outcrops and weathered, forgotten sheds. The sky deepens into dusky indigo, streaked with fading daylight as stars begin to emerge, their light timid against the expanse. The train slows, curving gently to reveal glimpses of small southern towns tucked behind rows of pine and sweet gum trees. Seneca, South Carolina, comes into view, its first flickering streetlights casting warm glows across the quiet streets. The town, settled on the edge of Lake Keowee, glistens with the reflections of homes and marinas scattered along the shoreline. The crisp, cold air mingles with the faint scent of lake water. Porches lit with inviting glows reveal moments of stillness, families gathering for dinner or sitting in living rooms surrounded by heirlooms and family portraits. Further along, the train glides into Clemson, where the presence of the university infuses the town with subdued energy, even in the chill of a February evening. Orange and purple flags sway from porches and storefronts, adding splashes of color to the muted tones of brick facades and barren trees. Students bundled in hoodies and beanies gather at bus stops or hurry across campus, their chatter and laughter blending with the rustle of dry leaves and the distant hum of the train. The last remnants of sunlight vanish beneath the horizon, leaving the world cloaked in deep blues and grays. The train presses forward, its headlights casting bright beams on the iron tracks ahead, while the carriages whisper with subdued sounds. The shuffle of feet, the murmur of quiet conversations, and the occasional clink of a cup against a saucer. Inside, the passengers settle into the rhythm of the journey, each lost in their own thoughts as the train carries them deeper into the heart of the Carolinas. In the coach compartment, deep navy seats cradle travelers in quiet camaraderie. The worn fabric, softened by time, glows faintly in the shifting light as the train moves onward. A lone traveler with earbuds leans against the window, their eyes closed as if lulled by the train's sway. An elderly couple sits close, their hands intertwined, sharing quiet whispers as the light of day fades. A young student scrawls notes into a notebook, glancing occasionally at the passing landscape, perhaps seeking inspiration. Gainesville, Georgia, slips by in fleeting glimpses. Neat brick facades, bare trees casting intricate shadows, and porch lights flickering on as night begins its claim. The train skirts Lake Lanier's edge, where the still waters reflect the deepening hues of twilight. In the business class car, passengers enjoy an air of quiet refinement. A businessman scrolls through emails on his tablet, the screen's glow casting soft light across his face. Across the aisle, a woman sips coffee from a ceramic mug, her calm demeanor matching the serene landscape outside. The cafe car hums with muted energy as passengers line up for coffee or snacks, the barista's quick hands moving with practiced ease. Two friends in hiking boots laugh over shared stories, their camaraderie warming the space as night settles over the countryside. Outside, Toccoa flashes past, its amber-lit windows and quiet streets a fleeting collage of warmth in the growing darkness. The sleeping compartments offer sanctuaries of solitude, their dimly lit interiors a retreat from the communal spaces of the train. In one roomette, a young mother dozes beside her child, their shared blanket rising and falling with synchronized breaths. Through the window, the world rushes by in a blur of shadow and starlight, the skeletal trees etched against the dark sky. The whispered hiss of wheels on tracks becomes a soothing rhythm, lulling the sleepers into dreams. In the observation car, expansive windows frame the night in breathtaking detail. Faces press against the glass as passengers watch the world unfold. A child marveling at the blur of passing trees, a woman gazing wistfully at the stars as if chasing a memory, and a man scribbling in a worn journal, capturing the essence of the journey. The dense forest of the Chattahoochee National Forest gives way to rural farmland and small towns glowing softly in the distance. The lights of Seneca and Clemson flicker like constellations on the horizon, inviting and serene. In the quiet glow of the observation car, passengers fall into silence, their reflections merging with the landscape as the train presses onward. Captain Marcus Reynolds sits alone in his roomette, the narrow space lit by a soft overhead lamp. His back rests against the wall, his sharp eyes fixed on the darkened world outside. The leather briefcase beside him, locked and discreet, stays within arm's reach, its weight a constant reminder of the mission he carries. His fingers tap lightly against the armrest, keeping time with the steady rhythm of the train. Outside, shadows shift as the train weaves through the foothills and plains. Porch lights blink in the distance, and moonlight glints off the occasional farmhouse window. Reynolds' expression remains stoic, but the flicker of concern in his eyes betrays the thoughts running beneath the surface. The train moves like a steel serpent through the South Carolina night, carrying its passengers and their stories toward destinations unseen, into the quiet depths of the journey ahead. Captain Marcus Reynolds leans forward, elbows resting on his knees, his sharp eyes scanning the shifting scene outside as though the passing landscape might reveal a hidden code. To an observer, he appears calm, just another traveler watching the night unfold. But beneath his composed exterior lies a coiled tension, the readiness of a man shaped by years of high-stakes missions. The Dalon drive secured in his briefcase is more than a piece of technology. It's a key to a future fraught with possibilities and consequences far beyond what most could comprehend. A soft thud interrupts the quiet corridor outside, the faint sound of a bag being dropped. Reynolds' gaze snaps to the door, his fingers instinctively twitching toward the case, a reflex as ingrained as breathing. The sound fades, absorbed by the train's creaks and groans as it navigates a gentle curve in the track. His heartbeat slows, but his body remains alert, each muscle primed for action, every breath measured. The train presses deeper into the shadowed heart of the South, its steady rhythm blending with the quiet weight of the sleeper car. Each mile carries Reynolds and his precious cargo closer to the unknown. In the dimly lit operations room, Dwayne stands at the head of the table, his shadow looming against the wall as the projection screen behind him glows faintly. The air is charged, every eye in the room fixed on him. He draws a slow, deliberate breath before speaking, his tone calm but commanding. This briefing is more than an overview. It's a study of the man who could define the mission's success or failure. Agent Captain Marcus Reynolds, Dwayne begins, his voice steady, his words deliberate. 38 years old, 6 feet even. 15 years of service spanning multiple military and intelligence branches, currently with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. He's a communications and intelligence specialist with a reputation for precision in execution. Reynolds operates like a chess player on a time clock, every move calculated, every mistake avoided. Dwayne's gaze sweeps across the room, letting the weight of his words settle before continuing. Reynolds notices everything: micro-expressions, subtle shifts in tone, inconsistencies in behavior. He stores those observations, waiting for the exact moment to use them to his advantage. His situational awareness is unparalleled. He's meticulous, methodical, and unrelenting. You don't catch him off guard easily. He steps closer to the table, his voice dropping slightly, almost as if confiding in the room. On a personal level, he's solitary, divorced, no kids. His colleagues respect him, but they keep their distance. Reynolds doesn't build friendships, he builds contingencies, and he carries the weight of every decision he's made, every life lost on his watch, every mission that didn't go to plan. That weight makes him dangerous. It means he'll make the hard call, no hesitation. A moment of silence hangs heavy, the agents absorbing the gravity of the man they face. Today, he's the one guarding the Dalon drive. He knows it's valuable, but he doesn't know who's coming for it or when. Our job is to stay ahead of him. Dwayne's voice cuts through the comms in the operations room, steady and precise. Positions are green. Execute in 10. We get one shot at this. In the corridor, Serena adjusts her ID badge, her footsteps silent against the narrow carpeted floor. The soft sway of the train as it rounds a bend doesn't deter her. Her uniform, crisp and unassuming, belies the sharp focus in her dark eyes. She approaches Reynolds' door, her fingers brushing the small device concealed in her pocket. We are ready to confront Reynolds. Max's voice crackles through the earpiece. His hands fly over the keyboard, looping camera feeds to buy the team precious seconds. Security feeds are stable. All surveillance is a go. Dwayne tracks the red dot on the GPS feed as the train moves past Toccoa, nearing the South Carolina border. The faint glow of distant towns gives way to darkness, broken only by the gleam of moonlight on skeletal tree branches. Serena, we are a go. Serena presses the device to the door latch, triggering a barely audible beep as the electronic lock overrides. She steps inside with practiced ease, her voice composed but firm. Good evening, sir. Routine inspection. We've had some minor signal interference, just ensuring everything's functioning properly. Reynolds turns, his sharp gaze locking on her. I wasn't informed of any issues, he says, his tone clipped, suspicion creeping into his voice. His hand rests lightly on the briefcase, fingers flexing just enough to suggest readiness. Stay calm, Dwayne whispers into her earpiece. Proceed. Serena maintains her composure, holding up a device that emits a faint hum. She moves with the casual air of someone conducting a routine check, scanning the table and surrounding surfaces. Behind her calm exterior, her every move is calculated, precise. The tension in the room is thick, the air heavy with unspoken stakes. Captain Marcus Reynolds tilts his head slightly, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. His gaze isn't on the briefcase or the scanner Serena holds. It's fixed on her, sharp and assessing. Dwayne's eyes narrow as he catches the subtle shift on the screen, the realization hitting him like a jolt. Reynolds is taking a liking to her. Change of plans, Dwayne's voice crackles over the comm, calm but urgent. Serena, lean into it. Flirt with him. Make him drop his guard. Serena hesitates just for a fraction of a second before exhaling softly. Copy that. She thinks to herself, her resolve steady despite the sudden spike in her pulse and change of plans. Reynolds leans back slightly, his posture relaxing as his lips curve into a practiced smile. Funny, I don't remember seeing you on the roster before, he says, his voice smooth and measured. His hand moves away from the briefcase, resting loosely on his knee as his gaze lingers on her. Serena lets out a soft laugh, keeping her expression light as she continues running the scanner. They called me in last minute. Guess I'm the only one who knows her way around these finicky machines, she replies, tilting her head so the light catches her cheekbone just right. Dwayne's voice hums in her ear, guiding and steady. Good. Keep him talking. You're close. Not quite done yet, she adds, letting a playful smirk curl her lips as she holds Reynolds' gaze for just a beat too long. She watches the slight shift in his posture, his body easing further into the seat as his curiosity sharpens into something closer to intrigue. Last minute? Now, that sounds interesting, Reynolds quips, his tone edging toward charm. Maybe we could talk more about it, off the clock, of course. Serena's mind races, balancing the fine line between disarming him and maintaining control. The hum of the train fades into the background, replaced by the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. Depends on how much time we have. She replies with a playful chuckle, her voice carrying just enough teasing warmth to keep him hooked. Dwayne's voice cuts through, low and insistent. Almost there, Serena. Reynolds leans forward slightly, his tone dropping to a near purr. Well, with someone like yourself, I'd make time, he says, his eyes catching on the way her hair curls against her neck. He's closer now, the guarded walls in his gaze lowering just enough for her to see the man beneath the soldier. Serena forces herself to stay steady, flashing a coy smile as her fingers brush lightly against the briefcase. Her pulse quickens, the tension between them charged and electric. She feels the weight of the mission pressing on her, her instincts and training locked in a delicate dance. And then a knock. The sharp sound startles them both. Serena freezes, her hand hovering near the armrest as Reynolds straightens, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Expecting someone? She asks, her voice low and tight. Before he can respond, the knock comes again, louder this time. The door slides open to reveal two men in dark, nondescript clothing. Their expressions are hard, their presence heavy with menace. Hand over the thumb drive, and no one gets hurt, one of them demands, his tone flat but deadly. Serena blinks, her shock genuine as she looks between the intruders and Reynolds. Serena, stall them, Dwayne's voice urges, calm but urgent in her ear. Reynolds steps in front of her instinctively, his body tense and coiled. You've got the wrong room, he says evenly, though his hand hovers near the briefcase. These guys are not ours, Max's voice crackles through the comm. Repeat, not ours. Reynolds' jaw tightens. I'm not going to be able to do that, he mutters under his breath, his stance shifting. The first man lunges for the briefcase, and Reynolds moves with practiced precision. His fist slams into the man's ribs with a sickening thud, sending him staggering back into the doorframe. The narrow space erupts into chaos as the second man surges forward, swinging a heavy fist aimed at Reynolds' head. Ducking swiftly, Reynolds counters with a sharp uppercut that snaps the man's head back, followed by a brutal elbow to the chest that sends him reeling into the opposite wall. Serena shrinks against the wall, her eyes wide, appearing fragile as she lets out a shriek. Her gaze, however, is locked on the briefcase now lying on the floor, its lock disengaged. Papers scatter like leaves in a storm, and the gleam of the thumb drive catches her eye. Dropping to her knees, she fumbles with the scattered contents, her movements frantic. Under the guise of scrambling for safety, she deftly swaps the real drive for a decoy, slipping the original into her pocket in one fluid motion. Behind her, Reynolds twists the arm of the first assailant, driving him face first into the desk. The man lets out a pained grunt as Reynolds slams his knee into his ribs for good measure, sending him crumpling to the floor. The second man tries to regain his footing, rushing Serena with a snarl. Reynolds roars, intercepting him with a devastating sidekick to the stomach that hurls him back into the narrow hallway. The fight spills into the corridor as two more men charge forward, their heavy boots pounding against the carpeted floor. Reynolds doesn't hesitate, meeting the first with a sweeping low kick that sends him crashing onto his back. The second attacker swings a baton with deadly intent, but Reynolds sidesteps smoothly, catching the man's wrist and twisting it sharply. The baton clatters to the floor as the attacker yelps in pain, his body dropping as Reynolds follows up with a precise chop to his throat. The man on the ground grabs at Reynolds' leg, attempting to pull him down, but Reynolds stomps hard on his wrist, eliciting a sharp cry. He pivots, his fists a blur as he delivers a punishing series of strikes to the man's face and torso, leaving him slumped and groaning. Serena, still kneeling in the room, clutches her chest theatrically, her breaths coming in exaggerated gasps. "Please, just stop!" she cries, casting a wide-eyed look of terror at the remaining men. One of the assailants hesitates, his attention momentarily split between her and the unrelenting fury of Reynolds. It's a fatal mistake. Reynolds capitalizes on the opening, spinning and driving a powerful backhand into the man's jaw. The attacker stumbles, only to be met with a bone-crunching shoulder slam that sends him sprawling into the corridor wall. The final attacker lunges from behind with a knife, aiming for Reynolds' ribs. Sensing the movement, Reynolds sidesteps and traps the man's arm, wrenching it upward with a loud pop. The knife clatters to the floor as Reynolds finishes with a brutal knee strike to the man's gut, dropping him in a heap. The hallway falls still, the only sounds the labored groans of the defeated men and Reynolds' steady breathing. He wipes a trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth, his sharp eyes scanning the scene for any lingering threats. Back in the room, Serena rises unsteadily, clutching at the wall for support as though barely holding herself together. Her hands tremble slightly, the perfect picture of a woman rattled by violence. Are they gone?" she stammers, her voice shaking. Reynolds steps back into the room, his imposing figure framed by the doorway. His gaze softens slightly as he looks her over, ensuring she's unharmed. "You okay?" he asks, his voice rough with exertion. Serena nods quickly, brushing imaginary dust off her uniform. "Better than them," she quips, her tone light, but her expression still carefully frazzled. She adjusts her badge with trembling hands and flashes a wry smile. "Thanks for the excitement, but I've got other cabins to check," she says breezily, stepping toward the door with steady but measured steps. Reynolds watches her go, his gaze lingering as the faint scent of her perfume drifts in her wake. Something gnaws at him, a vague unease that he can't quite place, but the unconscious bodies at his feet demand his immediate attention. Just before she disappears down the corridor, Serena turns back with a small, playful smile. "I've got a lunch break in 3 hours. If I come back, will it just be us, or should I expect more company?" Reynolds chuckles, the tension momentarily breaking. "I'll keep it clear," he says, his grin widening as he envisions what might fill that time. Serena's voice whispers into her comms as she walks away. Package secured. "Good work," Dwayne replies, his relief palpable. On the live feed, Reynolds remains seated, his sharp gaze fixed on the darkened expanse of the February night, fully unaware of the mission's quiet success. Reynolds watches her go, his gaze lingering as the faint scent of her perfume drifts in her wake. Something about her tugs at the edges of his thoughts, but he shakes it off, turning his attention to the scattered contents of his briefcase. Just then Serena turns and says to Reynolds in a playful banter, "I have a lunch break in 3 hours. If I come back, will it just be us, or will some more people be popping up?" Reynolds displays a huge smile as he envisions what he and Serena will do to entertain themselves during that time. Watching her walk away, Serena's voice whispers through the comm, I'm going back to make sure that package is secured later. Good work. Dwayne replies with a chuckle, his relief palpable. His eyes flick to the live feed, where Reynolds sits motionless, his expression unreadable as he gazes out into the dark expanse of the February night, fully aware of the mission's quiet success. The room hums with subdued energy, but Dwayne feels distant from it all. Monitors flicker with live feeds, the muted voices of agents and analysts weaving an ambient noise that barely registers. He sits still, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, elbows resting on the edge of the desk. His shoulders remain squared, his posture disciplined, but the weight pressing down on him is unrelenting. Inside, a storm churns. He doesn't let it show, not to the team, not to anyone. Each success comes with a cost, a piece of himself surrendered to the growing strain, a quiet erosion of the man beneath the mission. The stakes don't just feel high, they feel absolute. Every move is a calculated risk, every step a tightrope walk above a chasm he doesn't dare to imagine falling into. There's no room for missteps, no margin for failure. The thought grips him like a vice. His mind turns to the mission just completed, the brief flash of relief at Serena's success already fading. It's not enough to celebrate, it never is. His thoughts spiral forward to the next challenge, the next move he must anticipate. The constant vigilance, the relentless need to stay 3 steps ahead, gnaws at him. His chest feels tight, his breaths measured and deliberate, an effort to stay grounded amidst the chaos within. There's a hollow ache in his gut, one he's learned to live with. It's the cost of leadership, of carrying the weight of decisions that ripple far beyond his immediate reach. He thinks of the team, the people who trust him to guide them, to bring them through this unscathed. The pressure to protect them, to shield them from the consequences of his own mistakes, feels crushing at times. Yet he carries it because he has to. Fatigue claws at him, a dull, persistent throb behind his eyes. Sleep is a luxury he can't afford, not when every moment spent at rest feels like a potential opportunity slipping away. The mental strain is a constant companion, the edges of his thoughts fraying with the effort to keep every contingency in mind. But he forces himself to focus, to push the wariness aside. He's done it before, and he'll do it again, because stopping isn't an option. Dwayne exhales slowly, his jaw tightening as he wrestles with the weight of it all. The mission isn't over. It won't be over until every objective is complete. For now, though, he allows himself a fleeting moment to sit in the silence within himself. Not to dwell, not to question, just to feel the burden he carries, to acknowledge it without letting it consume him. He unclenches his hands, his fingers flexing slightly as if testing their resolve. His eyes flicker to the monitors, scanning the feeds with renewed focus. The storm inside doesn't abate, but he lets it fuel him. The fear, the doubt, the exhaustion, they are all part of the same fire that keeps him moving forward. And forward is the only direction he allows himself to go. Breath, Dwayne. Breathe. Meanwhile, back in Allen, Texas, Detective Keith Johnson parks his vehicle in front of the modest apartment complex on Maple Street. The building is quiet, unassuming, with faded brick walls and a few porch lights illuminating the entryway. The only sound is the faint hum of a nearby street lamp, flickering intermittently. Johnson steps out, adjusting his jacket as he approaches the front door. His hand hovers near his holster, his instincts sharp. The reports he received about Darren Watt's behavior were oddly vague. No signs of a manic episode, no violence, just silence. The stillness unnerves him more than any chaos might have. The door is unlocked. Johnson pushes it open slowly, his flashlight cutting through the dim interior. The air inside is stale, tinged with the faint scent of mildew and cleaning supplies. The apartment is neat, almost meticulously so, with no signs of struggle or disarray. Johnson moves cautiously through the space, his eyes scanning every detail. A half-empty coffee cup sits on the kitchen counter, a newspaper folded neatly beside it. The living room is sparse but tidy, no overturned furniture, no shattered glass. It's as if Darren Watts had simply vanished, leaving everything untouched. "Watts?" Johnson calls out, his voice steady but firm. There's no response. He continues his search, moving down the narrow hallway toward the bedroom. The bed is made, the covers smoothed out perfectly. A closet door hangs slightly ajar, and Johnson checks it, finding only neatly arranged clothing and a pair of shoes on the floor. He frowns, the unease in his chest growing. The last door at the end of the hallway leads to the bathroom. Johnson pushes it open, and the beam of his flashlight sweeps across the small space before landing on the bathtub. Darren Watts lies crumpled and grotesquely twisted in the tub, his body contorted in an unnatural spasm. His head tilts at an awkward angle against the porcelain edge, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. One arm juts outward, fingers splayed as though clawing at something unseen, while the other bends backward at an angle that defies human anatomy. His legs are drawn up tightly, knees pressed to his chest, the tension in his muscles preserved even in death. His skin is waxy and mottled, a sickly gray with patches of faint blue and green discoloration, as though some chemical reaction has taken place. The water in the tub is clear but strangely reflective, its surface rippling slightly as the faucet continues to run. The bathtub's overflow drain prevents it from spilling, creating a steady trickle of water that flows downward, the sound unnervingly rhythmic in the silence. The water barely reaches Darren's twisted waist, and a faint chemical odor lingers in the air, sharp and biting, mingling with the metallic scent of death. The walls around the tub are covered in frantic scribbles and jagged writing, some done in what looks like blood, others in ink or a chalky residue smeared across the tiled surface. The scrawled messages spiral outward in erratic patterns, looping and overlapping as though Darren had lost control of his coherence. Words like, "They're watching," "The noise won't stop," and "It's in the water," leap out from the chaos. Symbols, crude and hurried, are scattered between the phrases, circles within circles, jagged lines, and crude humanoid shapes with hollow eyes. Johnson's flashlight catches more unsettling details. Scratches gouge the porcelain rim of the tub, where Darren's fingers must have clawed in his final moments. The mirror above the sink is shattered, fragments scattered across the counter and floor, reflecting the flashlight's beam in fractured, disorienting glints. On the floor, a single notebook lies open, its pages soaked and warped, but still bearing faint, frenzied handwriting. The lines are uneven, the ink smudged, as though written with a trembling hand. One phrase repeats itself several times. "Don't close your eyes." The dripping faucet echoes louder now, each drop amplifying the tension in the room. The water's steady flow down the overflow drain seems almost alive, like it's carrying Darren's final moments away, piece by piece. Johnson's breath catches in his throat as he steps closer, his stomach tightening at the horrific sight. The calm expression often associated with death is absent here. Darren's face is a rictus of agony, his wide, bloodshot eyes staring into the void with a maddened clarity, as though he died seeing something too terrible to comprehend. Johnson doesn't dare to touch the water, the chemical tang making his eyes water as he leans in for a closer look. The patterns on the walls seem to twist and shift under the flickering light, the scrawled writing appearing to crawl like insects across the tiles. The room feels alive with a residual energy, a lingering echo of Darren's final, tormented moments. The air grows heavier, oppressive, and Johnson feels the weight of something unspoken pressing against him. He steps back, his flashlight shaking slightly as he surveys the grotesque tableau. Whatever happened here, it wasn't peaceful. Darren Watts may have succumbed in silence, but the room screams of madness, fear, and the unknown. Johnson stares for a moment, frozen by the unnatural serenity of the scene. This isn't what he expected. Not chaos, not violence, but silence. It feels wrong, deeply and profoundly wrong. He steps back, pulling out his phone and dialing Detective Walker. As the line rings, he glances around the bathroom, looking for anything, a note, a clue, a sign of what might have happened. But there's nothing. "Walker, it's Johnson," he says when the call connects. His voice is low, almost a whisper, as though speaking louder might disturb the unnatural quiet. "I've got Watts." "What's the situation?" Walker asks, his tone tense. "He's dead," Johnson replies flatly. "No struggle, no signs of violence, just dead. I found him in the bathtub." There's a long pause on the other end. "You're sure?" Walker finally asks. "Positive. EMTs are pulling up now. I hear them in the distance, but he's gone, Walker. I don't know how or why, but he's gone." Walker's voice is heavy when he responds. "No pepper spray?" "None," Johnson confirms. "Place is spotless. It's like he just stopped." "Did you check his pulse?" Walker's voice crackles over the line, the question sharp and immediate. Johnson freezes, the flashlight still in his hand. His gaze shifts back toward the bathtub where Darren Watts lies twisted and grotesque. The idea unsettles him. Watts is clearly dead. He looks lifeless. But Walker's question gnaws at him. "No," Johnson mutters, his voice low. "I didn't think—" "Do it," Walker orders, his tone leaving no room for argument. Johnson takes a hesitant step forward, the air in the bathroom feeling heavier with each movement. The flickering light from the hallway creates eerie shadows that stretch across the contorted body. Kneeling beside the tub, Johnson reaches out with trembling fingers, his heart thundering in his chest. His hand brushes the cold, waxy skin of Watts' wrist, and then Watts moves. With a guttural scream, Watts springs to life, lurching forward like a predator pouncing on prey. His arms wrap around Johnson's shoulders, clawing and pulling with a manic strength that defies logic. "Get it off me!" Watts shrieks, his voice raw and otherworldly. "It's on me! Can't you see it?" Johnson staggers under the sudden weight, adrenaline exploding in his veins. "What the hell?" he shouts, twisting violently to free himself. Watts clings to him, his hands gripping with unnatural force. The detective stumbles backward into the wall, slamming his elbow into Watts' side to break his hold. "Let go," Johnson yells, his voice edged with panic. Watts finally loosens his grip, but not before clawing at Johnson's back with desperate fingers. The detective spins, his eyes locking onto Watts, who now stands hunched, his breath ragged, his eyes wide and wild. "It's everywhere." Watts howls, scratching at his arms as though trying to peel something off his skin. "Don't let it touch you! Don't let it touch you!" Johnson backs into the hallway, his flashlight trembling in his hand. "Watts, calm down," he commands, though his voice shakes. "There's nothing on you. Just stop." Watts doesn't listen. He lunges again, his movements erratic and frenzied. Johnson ducks, narrowly avoiding a swing, and bolts down the hallway. Watts follows, his screams reverberating through the house. "You can't escape it," Watts yells, his voice cracking with hysteria. "It's inside us! It's inside!" Johnson darts into the living room, scanning for anything to defend himself. He grabs a chair, spinning to face Watts as the man barrels toward him. Swinging the chair, Johnson blocks the charge, the force of the impact knocking Watts off balance. The crazed man crashes into the coffee table, shattering it into splinters. But he doesn't stop. Watts scrambles to his feet, his face twisted in terror, his hands clawing at invisible tormentors. "They're here!" he shrieks. "They're everywhere!" He rushes toward Johnson again, his movements jerky and inhuman. Johnson throws the chair at Watts, buying himself a few precious seconds. He sprints toward the front door, fumbling with the lock as his heart pounds in his chest. Behind him, Watts' screams grow louder, closer. Finally wrenching the door open, Johnson stumbles outside, gasping for air as the night swallows him. The ambulance pulls up just as Johnson reaches his car. He dives inside, slamming the door and flipping on the lights. The siren wails to life, casting red and blue flashes across the apartment complex. Neighbors peer through their windows or step outside, their faces illuminated by the chaotic glow. From inside the apartment, Watts' screams pierce the night. "They won't stop. They won't stop." His voice grows louder, more desperate. And then he appears at the window. The crowd gasps as Watts stares out, his face a mask of raw terror. His bloodshot eyes scan the gathered onlookers, and for a moment he seems to focus on something beyond their understanding. Without warning, he disappears from view. The crowd murmurs, confused, until a loud crash echoes through the night. Watts hurtles through the broken window, landing hard on the ground below. His body twists unnaturally on impact, but he rises with an unholy determination, his movements stiff yet relentless. Blood drips from his wounds as he charges toward a neighbor, standing frozen in shock. Johnson leaps from his car, drawing his taser. "Stop," he yells, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Darren, stop right there!" Watts doesn't falter. His screams are incoherent now, guttural noises ripped from a throat pushed beyond its limits. Johnson fires the taser just as Watts lunges for the terrified neighbor. The prongs hit their mark, and Watts convulses, collapsing to the ground. And then, flames. Watts ignites instantly, his body engulfed in a brilliant, unnatural fire. The crowd screams and scatters as the blaze roars, casting monstrous flickering shadows against the building walls. Johnson freezes, his eyes wide in shock, the taser slipping from his hand. But Watts doesn't collapse. Instead, he stands, his movements jerky and slow, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Johnson. His screams are not of pain but of rage and terror, a cacophony of incoherent rants that echo through the night. "They're still here," he howls, his voice raw and guttural. "You can't stop it! You can't stop it!" Watts lurches forward, his burning frame a grotesque silhouette. The fire consumes him, flames licking hungrily at his skin and clothes, yet he doesn't flinch. It's as if the fire isn't there for him, an invisible torment that only the onlookers can comprehend. Johnson stumbles backward, his chest tight with disbelief. How is he still moving?" he whispers, his voice caught in his throat. Watts takes another step, his charred skin beginning to crack and peel, revealing muscle that withers and sizzles under the relentless flames. The acrid stench of burning flesh and singed hair fills the air, making Johnson gag as the crowd watches in horrified silence. Layers of tissue slough off with each movement, exposing blackened bone beneath. But Watts presses forward, his eyes wild and unrelenting. "Don't look away!" Watts screams, his voice breaking as chunks of his face crumble, leaving only a skeletal grimace illuminated by the fire. "It's inside me! It's inside all of us!" His steps grow slower, more labored, as the inferno finally begins to take its toll. Johnson is paralyzed, unable to tear his gaze away from the horrifying sight. Watts staggers, his legs barely supporting the charred remains of his body. With one last guttural wail, he collapses, falling into a smoldering heap. The flames devour what little is left, the grotesque mound of flesh and bone hissing and crackling as it finally succumbs to the fire. The night falls eerily silent, the only sound the faint popping of embers and the distant murmur of stunned onlookers. Johnson stands rooted to the spot, his chest heaving as he struggles to process what he's just witnessed. His hand trembles as he reaches for his phone, dialing Walker with fumbling fingers. "Walker," Johnson croaks, his voice barely audible. "Watts, he caught fire, but he didn't go down. He kept moving, screaming, like the fire wasn't even there, and then he just burned until he couldn't move anymore." Walker is silent for a moment, the weight of Johnson's words sinking in. "What the hell is happening out there?" he finally mutters, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I don't know," Johnson replies, his gaze fixed on the still smoking heap. His voice trembles, a mix of fear and exhaustion. "But this isn't normal. We're dealing with something we don't understand." Ending the call, Johnson leans heavily against the side of his car, his body trembling. The flashing lights of the ambulance and police cars bathe the scene in red and blue, their glow unable to pierce the darkness that seems to hang over the moment. He closes his eyes, his breath shallow, trying to steady himself. But the image of Watts, burning, relentless and unyielding, sears itself into his mind, a grim reminder that whatever this is, it's far from over.